Hello and welcome. You're watching NDTV Profit. I'm Sanjana and today is a very special day. It's Women's Day. And today we're diving into a conversation that isn't just about fairness. It's about opportunity, it's about growth, it's about untapped potential. Women make up nearly half of India's population, yet their participation in the workforce stands at just 32.8%, one of the lowest among G20 nations. But here's the potential. If we bridge this gap, India's GDP could rise by over 700 billion just by 2025. Now that's the scale of impact we're talking about. When women work, economies flourish. The good news is we're seeing more women in education, breaking barriers in traditionally male-dominated fields, and even outpacing men in voter turnout. But challenges remain. Women continue to shoulder 9.8 times more unpaid domestic and caregiving work than men. Many drop out of the workforce mid-career due to a lack of support systems. Pay gaps, workplace policies, and the rise of the gig economy have brought both hurdles and new opportunities. So how do we accelerate progress? What policies, corporate strategies, and societal shifts will ensure that women don't just participate, but really thrive in the workforce? Now, to unpack this, we have a fantastic panel of experts today. Really, all of these are my favorite women, economists, gender specialists, legal and DEI leaders who will help us navigate the challenges and, more importantly, the solutions. Let's jump right in. I'd like to introduce my panelists today. Dr. Ranjana Kumari, Director, Center for Social Research; Rutuja Shinde, Posh Law and DEI Consultant; Mithali Nikore, Economist and founder Nikore Associates; and Dr. Ashwini Deshpande, HOD Economics and Founding Director, Center for Economic Data and Analysis, Ashoka University. Ladies, thank you so much for joining me today. And like I said before we went on air, I'm so glad I could facilitate this reunion, especially on Women's Day for all of us. Dr. Deshpande, I'm going to come to you. Plain, simple and straightforward. What are the biggest structural barriers preventing women from staying in the workforce?
So you mentioned, well, first of all, thank you for having me on the show. It's really a pleasure. You mentioned the biggest one already, in your introductory remarks, which is the disproportionate burden that women have to bear of domestic work and care work. And this is true across all classes of women, even women who can afford to hire help to help them with this job. It's their responsibility to get it all done. And this becomes one of the biggest barriers to joining paid work, most of the time because paid work is not available close to home. And so women know that even if they get into paid work, when they get back, they have to, do all the domestic work or most of the domestic work that's expected of them. And unless, when we talk about increasing participation of women in the paid work sector, we have to simultaneously talk about sharing the workload inside families. So the view that it is the work done for the household and all household members are responsible for it, that's the culture that we need to inculcate. But coming back to the paid workforce, one of the issues is that work is for most classes of women is not available close to where they are. Commuting is not easy, even in cities like Bombay or Mumbai, where there are better transport facilities. Work is very far away. It takes very long. There are not adequate childcare centers where they can, good quality centers where women can leave their children or elderly for care. And so, and the workplace culture, about which hopefully we can talk a little bit later. So all of this combines to militate against women's desire to actually participate in paid work, because survey after survey has demonstrated that women want to be in paid work as equals. However, there are all of these structural barriers that prevent women from joining. And of course, the good old-fashioned discrimination at the workplace, gender discrimination, where India is not unique. Every country has it, but we have it too. So all of these combine to, produce major structural barriers.
So then, going into the discrimination aspect of it, Dr. Ranjana Kumari, how can we shift societal perceptions to recognize unpaid work as a valuable economic activity, and also societal perspectives even for paid work? Because it's not like those women have it better. Of course, definitely in terms of privilege and some financial freedom and economic standing, but I often view that as rather exploitative, because once these women go home, they're taking on all of that emotional and mental burden once again.
So I think two things that we need to look at this point, and Ashwini has underlined a lot of these issues. You also talked about them, but through an extensive study, when we looked at the women managers, mid-level career managers, why they don't get promoted to the top level, and many things unfolded through that research. One, of course, is that we tend to always believe that it is structural barrier. One of the main reason is home, or you can say social pressures, so social pull factors, which really make women or forces women to withdraw or not to join the workforce. Well, that certainly is a very, very big issue. But when you look at the other side of the picture, and when especially when you look at the way the policy is structured around this, that the paid leaves, the leaves that women take during pregnancy and afterwards to nurture and take care of the children, discourages the big corporates and companies to hire those women. And if you have just got married and if you are in an interview, then the interview is not blind from the gender bias. They definitely will look at, oh, so this one is going to take leave, and then so that's something that also pushes women out of the workforce. And also the exploitation level, that gig economy has opened the doors, and a lot of women have got into it, and from 19% we have jumped to actually 32.8%, as you were mentioning. But look at the level of exploitation, look at the kind of burden of work without any insurance, without any job security, without any, so that also is a kind of mindset of the corporate companies, different, to somehow avoid and wriggle out of these responsibilities and not follow the laws of the land. Now, thirdly, also when you look at the way women are being viewed in terms of development of their leadership, upskilling women in the workforce, and trying to give them more opportunities, then you see, there is problem. There's a problem that they don't get as many opportunities to get upskilled. They don't get as many opportunity to play leadership role because they don't trust in women's leadership. So the story, whereas is very societal, and also the responsibility, the burden, the children and all that stuff, but at the same time, still the mindset that prevails in our economy in terms of our corporates and companies and institutions, then is there. And also you have to pay then attention to what government is doing about all this. What is the people who can really create conditions by framing the policies and laws to make the response better towards women workers. Now, making response better, you do need a lot of understanding about, as we talked about cultural shift, that certainly there has to be a joint parental responsibility. We did increase maternity leave, but it is maternity leave, it is for mothers.
Yeah.
If you make it 26 weeks, then also it's the mother who's supposed to take care of. So why not half and half? Why not give another 12 weeks or 14 weeks to the man to take care of the child at home? And also, so even as a people, even in a democratic system, we have not understood that this has to be a kind of joint responsibility. The care work cannot go on alone just by women. So, what policies have we framed really to change that perception, or that mindset, or that kind of a behavioral thing that is happening in our society? Now, also, I would say that when you look at so social norm shift can happen if people are not willing to change. We have to create regulations, laws, frameworks, policies to change people and their behavior. But not much has been done because women's work is not valued. It's not been, and also how many researchers can we quote in India where we can say that, look, care economy, if you really start monetizing it, then the whole paradigm shift will happen. The whole nature of the way we look at our GDP, the growth of our economy will change.
Absolutely.
But not much researches have been done to prove that. There are here and there university-based, scholar-based researches, but something which can come as a big, huge national survey. And we see how NSSO did in 2019, I think, about time disposition studies, where they talked about men spending much less time than women. In fact, 1/10 of the time than women. So all this, this also is a kind of lackluster attitude towards women in workforce.
Mitali, do you think that we should introduce policies that then compensate unpaid labor?
Thanks a lot, Sanjana, for bringing me into the conversation. And, I'd like to just focus on two or three aspects which were spoken about and one or two which weren't.
Sure.
So, firstly, I think, when it comes to unpaid labor and the actual economic value of unpaid labor, in our research that we did with the Ministry of Women and CII and Karmanya Council last year, we actually estimated that the shadow economic value of unpaid labor is nearly 15 to 17% of GDP. And this is actually exceeding the overall value that manufacturing contributes to the GDP, which is 13% of GDP. So, at the end of the day, this work which is being done is highly valuable and also monetizable. So, I actually don't believe that we should be paying women for doing unpaid work. I actually believe that we should be creating a care economy and we should be investing in more child care services, in more elderly care services, in services for long-term care for highly dependent adults, as well as, creating more professional cadres of domestic workers, where domestic workers are actually paid what they are due and the working conditions that they are due. And this can be done through a combination of investments that come from, of course, the government, but also complemented by the private sector, by corporate social responsibility, and by community based organizations, which can really come together through these ecosystems. And we have developed a very detailed care economy strategy in support of the Ministry of Women, which actually lays out the details of how this can be implemented. A second point I'd like to make is something which we haven't discussed so far, which is something that Ashwini ma'am often talks about is where are the jobs, right? At the end of the day, if we have to increase the female labor force participation rate, one part is to look at the supply side barriers like unpaid care work or look at mobility restrictions and create safer public spaces and safer workspaces. But the other side is to say where is it that your jobs are actually being generated? And today, when I'm interacting with people in, say, the logistics sector, in the renewable energy sector, in manufacturing, there is a clear occupational segregation that's emerging in these sectors, high growth, high employment sectors, where women are still relegated to administrative and operations roles, but they are
Absolutely.
not getting that technical, skill and technical knowledge. So somewhere we have to work on bridging that skill gap. And thirdly, we have to bridge the digital gender divide, because at the end of the day, the future jobs are going to be generated in a digital economy. And if we can't have women be digital natives, then how are they going to come and take the jobs of the future?
Fantastic, Mitali. And now that you're talking about the digital gender divide, I'd also like to go into a little about the gender wage gap and the pay gap, and also looking at it from the perspective of the gig economy, right? Because we've seen an increase in the gig economy. We're seeing a lot more female participation, and while it offers a lot of flexibility and compensation and benefits, there's also a health insurance that has been promised in the budget, but that's yet to kick off. And that flexibility is also a con of the gig economy. So if I were to ask you, Mitali, as a follow-up, what policy interventions are needed to close the gender pay gap, and how can we encourage more women, like you rightly said, to enter these high-paying male-dominated sectors and the male-dominated positions where you're not just
Absolutely.
relegated to admin, but you're actually at senior leadership?
Absolutely. And Sanjana, it's very important to do that because the jobs which are most at risk of being automated today are the jobs which are most repetitive and most administrative and belonging to cost centers. So we need to have more and more women look at their jobs as, revenue generators, as entrepreneurs even within their jobs. And for that, they need to have the mind space, right? I mean, if you're only going to be thinking about your work at home, then you're not going to have the mind space to go out and be entrepreneurial in your job. Then you're just going to go and do a job and not want to aspire to have a career. And those are very different things. So I think to actually solve for the gender pay gap, we have to look at not only the compliance to the law or an equal pay law, but we have to look at an ecosystem approach where women are supported at every stage of their career journey, whether it's in the corporate sector or in the MSME space or in the startup space. And for that, of course, we need a very, very wide ecosystem of support.
Absolutely. Rutuja, how effective is India's Posh Act in ensuring workplace safety for women? And could there be, and there always could be, any other legal reforms that you think could actually strengthen women's workforce participation?
Sure. So, like I said, right, because Posh Act is a mandate, organizations understand it like a mandate. They may not necessarily understand it as a core value for their organization. So, while the act itself, if you look at it in terms of a framework, is quite exhaustive. In terms of global analysis, also, it is quite exhaustive. The gap that we are seeing is essentially in the implementation. Even today, you will find many organizations are non-compliant with the Posh Act, and this, despite there being so much awareness towards what it means to have a safe workplace, we see that organizations are trying to skirt the responsibility of fully implementing the in practice. Even if they are implementing it in practice, they may not be doing it in spirit. So while they are implementing it in their workplaces, have they really created a psychologically safe space for women to speak
Right.
up and say that I have had an experience of this nature within the workplace and I want to escalate this complaint without having the fear of retaliation or hostility, right?
Right.
So it is dependent on the way it is implemented. Now, coming to some of the things that we can do better in terms of creating safer workplaces. Of course, the Posh Act is applicable within an internal ecosystem. But when women are interacting with third parties, when they are going out in client-facing roles or as delivery partners, etc., so on and so forth, there isn't much that organizations can do when the respondent is not someone who's from the organization. Sometimes you are not able to trace them, you're not able to find out who that person was, that customer who came in yesterday is not visible tomorrow, so on and so forth. So there is where really organizations need to sit down and create frameworks of how they will deal with these kind of situations where both the parties may not be from the same organization and hence they need to protect their employees when they are out there doing their work. Of course, this is one of the larger problems in terms of implementation of the Posh Act. Then we talk about the gig economy or people who are freelancers working in roles that don't necessarily fit into an organizational system,
Sure.
right? We have seen many complaints come up in these scenarios where the complainant doesn't even know whom to approach. What is going to be the organization that is going to take my complaint, and how do I even file this complaint? Where do I go? There are few solutions to this. Maybe industry bodies could be given the power and authority to institute these ICCs, like we have seen in the Malayalam film industry. You know, the courts have said that you should institute an ICC, and if there are any complaints that are coming up, you should take it to that particular body. So each industry needs to identify the body who will be responsible for taking accountability of inquiring into complaints like this. So these are specific issues that we still have in terms of implementing a framework with respect to workplace safety and prevention of sexual harassment.
Absolutely, Rutuja. And Dr. Deshpande, from a macro perspective, what do you think would be the most impactful policy intervention to accelerate women in the workforce? And how do you think is the best way to implement it?
So I don't think there's one single policy. A lot of it has been already spoken. I won't repeat that. But I think the question of not adequate demand for women's labor is a very important one. The second point that has not been highlighted, which I'd like to highlight, is women in leadership positions. So you also alluded to that. How do you get women in leadership positions? The fact is that retention of women in the formal sector is important for them to advance to leadership positions. You see, nobody who has not had enough work experience can't suddenly be catapulted into a leadership position. So I think the formal sector definitely needs to think about how do we get back women to restart their careers after a career break. More importantly, how can we ensure that they don't take a career break? and then advance them further and keep them in leadership positions, because that's going to be, whether it's through the role model effect or just seeing women on top, women feel more confident. And there are tons of academic studies that show that having women in leadership positions improves the condition of women at lower downs in the rung. And I think a lot of attention gets paid to individual behavior and individual norms, which is, of course, important. But I think the larger question is that there isn't enough demand for women's work.
Fantastic perspective there. And my last question to Dr. Ranjana Kumari before I let all of you go, and thank you so much for your time in advance. Dr. Ranjana, we've been talking representation matters, and I think our conversation has been very focused about what's happening at the workplace. But if I were to ask you, how can we make truly equitable work environments for women by focusing what's at home? What would you suggest? What do you think are the interventions? What kind of mindset shifts do we need at home, starting from, your spouse to your mother-in-law to even your children?
Well, I think respect for equality, equality, equality. I mean, for everything that we are talking about is that we have to respect that a woman has as much space in the home and also has as much care. She also needs care. I mean, she's always seen as someone who's delivering the care economy, but nobody looks at how she needs the care. And also, the questions will have to be asked the other way around. Now we have been all the time trying to argue and support this whole idea of women getting into the workforce and how to retain women there, to bring women into the leadership positions. We have to see that how why it is going wrong. It is going wrong because we don't have a pay gap you talked about, but there are best practices or good practices of the pay gap that companies are forced to declare and be transparent about their pay, and they have to announce their whatever the audit report, so that people will get to know what kind of a pay gap exists in those places. Secondly, also to have re-entry into the workforce. How much opportunity do women get into entry into the workforce? And family will have to support that, because after COVID we realize a lot of women have gone back home. And then once they are at home, everybody is used to their presence and they're delivering the services to every human being who lives within the four walls of household. So they don't want her to let her go again back to the work. And also environment in the other side, which is the industry side, is not there to take them back. So this is another thing that home can prepare, home can make space for her, and she can go back to work. Then also flexible work hour. How many of us are really been talking about, and so much we've talked about flexible work hours. Now with the, you were talking about digital economy, and my experience with a lot of tech companies and being on their board for trust and safety, I know that women are there. Women are in large numbers there. But that's not just presence of women. It's the presence of women who are in responsible position to make decisions. Women who are in positions where they are kind of promoted, they are getting into the top of the table, they are not just being serving. Again, industry has the same very interesting pattern, where men govern and women serve, in whichever way you look at that. That's just like home. So you're saying home should change, and I'm saying once both sides will have to change. Home will have to change, children have to respect. And I think there is a culture now which has grown, and I'm very happy about that a lot of working mothers, children grow up very responsible, they respect their mother's work. So I don't have much complaint there. I have more complaint about how the society really is, when the it's an economic compulsion now in the future, that more and more women will have to be accommodated in the workforce. It's not going to work the way at the moment it is. The future has to have, and especially with the economy which is going to move toward digital, I mean, you have to let women go and work. So create those conditions where women can come and work, and home will have to be welcoming that, and creating every kind of support system to give her the care and not just expect the care from her all the time.
Absolutely. Fantastic concluding thoughts from you, Dr. Ranjana Kumari, and thank you to all of my panelists. It's been wonderful, as always. I didn't expect anything less. I've got my notes and map for the rest of the year. But thank you so much, and wishing all of you a happy Women's Day as we continue to shoulder more unpaid domestic work, more caregiving work, and drop out of the workforce mid-career? Can we create better support systems? Can we close that pay gap? And can we introduce better workplace policies and also support women in the gig economy? Thank you so much for watching.